Bonjour à vous tous et vous toutes. C'est les derniers mots que je vais prononcer en français. Peut-être pas si je vous passe la parole pour les questions. Hello everyone. I'm very happy to be with you on this afternoon to lead this plenary about energy transition and its acceptability. This subject main important has been discussed in the third IPCC report. This report published at the beginning of this month draws up an observation: mitigating climate change and staying beyond the 1 degree 5 mark is still possible. There are some solutions, more than some solutions, and also experts believe that that can be done without social acceptability, and we will discuss about the subject during this roundtable with 4 speakers. There is 1 speaker, if everything is okay, on the video conference. I present you on stage. Gilles Babinet, hello. Bonjour. You are a businessman, member of the board of directors of Les Voies du Nucléaire. I say it in French. You want to say some few words to present yourself?
I'm very pleased to be here.
Okay, thank you. And Pierre-Emmanuel Martin. Bonjour, hello.
Hello, everybody.
You are president of Groupe Terelac, president of My Energy Manager. Also a few words to present yourself?
So Terelac is an independent power producer, mainly solar, PV. We know a little bit about how to make some project be acceptable. And also My Energy Manager, which is a software solution for energy efficiency for the consumers. And also Environ is the French national professional association for the solar professional, and I'm the vice president in charge of industrialization with a main project, which is I'm also founder of Carbon, the gigafactory of PV in France.
Thank you very much. Guy Dixon, hello.
Hello Nathalie, good afternoon, bonjour à tous.
CO2 of Wind Europe. You can present Wind Europe for people who don't know you and don't know Wind Europe.
Thank you. Wind Europe is the European Association for Wind Energy. We are the voice of wind energy to the European Union and to national governments and other stakeholders across the whole of Europe. We are based in Brussels. We have 450 members across the whole value chain of wind energy, wind farm developers, wind turbine manufacturers, and others. Et je suis très heureux pour vous tous qu'il ne vous faut pas supporter mon accent épouvantable cet après-midi.
Thank you very much. And are we with Daniel Wetzel? You are with us from Brussels? Yes? Oh, yes, but yes, you can hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. So you are head of tracking sustainable transition unit for IEA. Everyone here knows this agency, but maybe you want to say some more words to present your activity?
Yes, absolutely. So the International Energy Agency, we cover all hosts of energy, all fuels, all technologies. I work on the World Energy Outlook team that puts our flagship publication out every year that looks at how different energy pathways may evolve in the future. So happy to be here and discuss more with this great panel.
Thank you very much. So now we can start. The idea, I will ask questions to the panelists, but you will ask also questions at the end. The idea is really to have a discussion and not only to be all with, with you all. So first of all, I want to ask a question to all of you. It is obvious that transition cannot be only based on technical and economic aspects. It's also a question of daily lives or our way of living together. Do you think it is also your point of view? Is it your point of view? The experts talk a lot about sobriety, and the lifestyle must therefore evolve to become more sober, and also all the citizens must be involved.
Yeah, of course. If we are talking about acceptance of renewable, first we must assume that the major figures is that it is fully supported by the people. So all the polls everywhere, I think in Europe, that you have a sort of 80–90% of the people who want renewable energies everywhere. So then you will have acceptance of the industry. You will have political acceptance. So you have several top type of acceptance we have to tackle or to address if we want to foster the pace of the renewable energies. So it's not only technical, it's not only a citizen point of view, but we have to also talk about how a big utility that is fully, deeply involved in fossil fuels, or a bank, can accept to have better project or better speed. If tomorrow we decided to not to subsidize or to pay any penny to fossil fuels, to, for example, no insurance for big oil project in Africa, then we will have a full acceptance of renewables everywhere. So I think that's the people want renewables. That's the main point. There is no debate about this. It's like climate change. I used to work for climate change for more than 30 years. And 30 years ago, there was a lot of climate skepticism. There is no debate. Climate change is here. It's the same for renewables. Renewables are here. Everybody wants renewables. But how can we finance how the big players that have been the main players in oil, in nuclear, can divest and be speed enough, speedier than the new entrants? So that's the question. And I think that acceptance deals with all these socio-economics problematics, if yes. I can answer to your question.
Yes, but it's the idea. Gail Dixon, what do you want to say about this question? First of all, that acceptability is a main point for develop renewable energy, even if a lot of people want renewable energy, as said Pierre-Emmanuel Martin.
Natalie, you used a good word, sobriety. In the European wind energy, we use a word, humility. Yes, opinion polls show that most people, a very large majority of people, want to tackle climate change. They want more renewable energy and they want more wind energy. The latest opinion polls in different countries show in Germany, 77% of people want more onshore wind, and the number is even higher among people who already live close to an onshore wind farm. They've got used to it, they can see the benefits. In Poland, sometimes considered climate skeptical, the number is 75%. Here in France, in the latest poll conducted by France Énergie Éolienne, last year the number was 76%. Now, that's 76% of the whole population, but you can't just assume everything is going to be fine because 76% of people say they want more onshore wind. No. We have to be humble, we have to engage every single community and commune wherever we want to build an onshore wind farm. And that means three things. First, it means talking to the local community as early as possible. Once we have the first idea about building a wind farm somewhere. It means giving the local community all of the information that we have, being completely transparent, comprehensive with them, hiding nothing. Secondly, it means engaging all of the key local actors. Of course, the town hall, the municipal government, but other key community groups. And it means activating the local economic actors as well. And thirdly, it means ensuring that the local community is going to benefit economically and socially from that wind farm. And there are different ways in which they can benefit. Nearly all onshore wind farms pay taxes to the local municipal government. There are many town halls in Europe that are getting 10% of their budget paid every year by the local wind farm. Then there are community benefit funds where the wind farm pays. In Germany now, it's a fixed amount, 0.2 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity produced will go into a community benefit fund. There are benefits in kind that can be offered to local communities as well by the wind farm owner, including support for insulating their homes, becoming more energy efficient. And finally, in some parts of Europe, the local community is invited to take a share or financial participation in the wind farm, just in some parts of Europe. But we've got to be humble. We've got to make sure that the local community is going to benefit and that they see and realize that they are going to benefit.
Yes, you start to speak about the solution and tools. I want to ask this question later, but that doesn't matter. It's important to talk about it. I will ask the same question to Gilles Babinet, and I don't forget Daniel Wetzel. You talk about wind. In France, it's more difficult than some years ago. There are more protests? No?
It has become more difficult than it used to be.
Yeah.
In many ways, that's natural and logical because there are more onshore wind farms than there used to be. France now has 19 gigawatts. But it's fair to say it is probably more difficult in France than in other countries in Europe.
And you think it's different. Pierre-Emmanuel Martin? Maybe about also this question.
For the wind,
France is
I used to develop some wind project 20 years ago, so I don't think I know precisely what was the the position, because when I started 25 years ago, you know, the authority that was in charge of our sector before the liberalisation of the electricity sector and the emergence of new body like the Commission Régulation de l'électricité, there was a small unit in the Ministry of Industry in charge of renewables. And the name was Service des énergies renouvelables et de l'utilisation rationnelle de l'énergie, which in acronym is serrure, lock in England, in English. So first, I will say that the acceptance was not an evidence at the very beginning. So there was a fight inside the states against renewables. So that was the first task we did, the pioneer of the wind in France in the 90s and the 20s, was to, and of course, due to the strong support of our European colleague, we succeeded in having the first project showing that, no, you know, we have to tackle this idea that once you put a windmill somewhere in France, then all the network will collapse and we will have a blackout. So no, we can include some renewable energy without any problem. And I think now that it gives a lot of money to the state. There was a study that something like 14 billions of euros for 2021 and 2022, due to the fact that we have a regulated price for the wind and the solar, which is 60 euro per megawatt hour. And when the price is, of course, 300 euros per megawatt hour, due to the regulation scheme, the French budget is gaining a lot of money from renewables. But now, I would say that, of course, it's a political matter. So we know that there is this position from politicians like Marine Le Pen. You know, just after Fukushima, I met Mrs. Le Pen for talking about solar, and she said to me, "Oh no, nuclear is evil. No more nuclear in France. Solar, yes, but nuclear is evil." Okay, now you see the position of Mrs. Le Pen. So there is this. I would say that the wind is sort of a sort of tools in the wind in the energy debate, which is not very serious, because what we say that, look at the figures, wind is a necessity, and as Mr. Dixon said, when you are properly working with close to the community, explaining your project, saying everything in transparency, giving all the indication, working on the fact that you are doing something in the landscape. Landscape is a common goods. So why your strategy or your project, that is some way of privatization of these common goods. So you have to understand why you have the right to privatize a little bit the landscape. And then if you work properly with landscape engineer, explaining the benefits of your project, I think there is not so much difficulties to tackle for wind acceptance. That's my opinion.
Yes. Gilles Babinet, I know you are ready to react, but first of all, I want to ask a question to Daniel Wetzel about, first of all, I said that it is not possible to develop renewable energy without social acceptability. We talk about France. Do you think it's very different from each country, very different depending on whether the countries are less or more electrified, maybe?
Yes, absolutely. So from looking at a global perspective, I would say that you sort of see a spectrum here where Europe, the approval rating of renewables is one of the highest, and then you sort of keep going along that spectrum. The US, China is still really positive, but you start getting places in India where the incumbency becomes quite strong, and there's some skepticism. Solar is very strong there, but I think by and large, renewables are a very popular form of energy with people. And many people see the immediate benefits, jobs, seen collective ownership. A lot of community ownership models have been really popular globally. So I think there's a lot of popularity around renewables. But I do want to take a step back around this acceptability is supply side measures are one of the easier ones to shift going forward on clean energy transitions. People, they plug in the electron, whether it comes from nuclear or solar or wind, doesn't matter to them. So from a consumer perspective, the impacts of more renewables are a little bit more distant. But if there was something, going back to your question on the IPCC report, it was one of the first reports that was pretty unequivocal about saying behavior change is going to be necessary from citizens in order to reach a trajectory that limits global warming to 1.5 degrees C. It's one of the first reports that really was pretty direct about this statement. And in the IEA's net zero by 2050 scenario that we put out last year, that draws this roadmap for what the energy sector would have to do to be able to keep the door open on 1.5 degrees C. We see some of the biggest changes are going to happen in the way that consumers use energy. That's switching to electric vehicles, that is switching to heat pumps, that is moving away from gas cooking to induction cooking. All of these, which we know are very close to many consumers' hearts, and these are some of the more difficult challenges that policymakers are going to have to face in this transition. Renewables have their own challenges as well, but I think that the industry has figured out a way to move those forward and bring many people along with that journey, and they've gotten very experienced on that. So I think that policymakers are going to need to start thinking more about how do we address these issues in other areas beyond just renewable electricity. And I think this is one of the areas the IEA is very focused on going forward. We have pulled together something called the Global Commission on People-Centered Transitions, which is a bunch of global energy leaders who recognize that the policy decisions we make today on energy are not going to be people agnostic. They're going to have impacts on the way society functions, the way that voters feel about different issues. And we have the option to sort of make policy in a vacuum or really try to maximize the benefits that people see to improve the acceptability of these measures. And so there was a list of recommendations that came out just before COP26. And we're trying to continue this thread to say, how do you maximize employment, maximize affordability, improve equity in society through these measures, and making sure that these are not an afterthought of this policy design, but in the core of it. Because single missteps on this clean energy transition could cause political backlash that makes policy advances unable to endure political cycles. So it's really important that we get this right now and in the first incarnation, so we're not seeing these setbacks.
Thank you very much. The three other speakers said a lot of things. Your reaction, Gilles Babinet?
I think it's quite interesting. I don't want to make this debate too much confrontational, but I think there are things that needs to be said. It's a lot about fact versus perception, and who wouldn't be against wind and solar? Because it's free and it seems to be really natural. So in general, I would say people without the knowledge of the complexity of what is a grid, they are tempted to say that they would love to have more wind and solar. And it's a good thing, actually, because we need part of it as a solution. But when you get into the details and you see that it's more complex and that you have load rates, that you have a pricing system which is quite complex to achieve and to make work well, I believe that you see that it is you need more diverse sources of energy, and
mix,
therefore,
as we like
yeah,
the name of this conference, yes.
Yeah,
Randy?
exactly, and therefore you see that it's not all about wind and solar. And I see, for instance, there was a very large debate among the Finnish population like 5 years ago, which came out as, okay, we should keep on building some nuclear power plant, because otherwise we won't be able to do net zero. And it's interesting because it's one of the countries across Europe which is probably the more favorable to nuclear. And it's very much, to me, tied to the fact that they had this debate. And we are seeing this coming in other countries more and more, because people have to be educated to the energy for several reasons. Because when we have wars, when we have issues with supply chains, we see that it's disrupted, and therefore the energy price spike. And also because it's very much linked to the fact that we're going to be able or not to achieve net zero. So it's I would say, mass education, which is ongoing, and which makes that people are better understanding what is at stake, and probably going from a perception to a culture, which is quite different. Perception is things you feel, you believe it's right, but you don't know why. Culture is something which is massively distributed, which could be technical as well, scientific, and therefore you see that it's something which is not about only two systems, solar and wind, and it's about a grid, making the grid work. And for as much as I can see, it's not possible to have a grid which works only on those two. It's not achievable. What we see is that storage is limited. We don't think that hydrogen will work anytime soon, at least within the next couple of decades. We won't have hydrogen working on a large scale, and therefore we will be able to have a base load. We will need to have a base load which is nuclear. And this wasn't at all perceived. And on top of this, we had Fukushima recently, and people wanted to move out of nuclear. But I think that on the long run, we have, on top of the perception of I would say, this enormous accident which was striking the mindset of everyone, we had probably a more common, shared understanding of the reality of it. There was only one person who died directly from the radiation, and if you take the overall footprint that is not usable due to the radiation today, it's not even 1/17 of the overall footprint of the solar system in France. So it's not that big. It's perception versus reality.
I understand your point of view, but I talk about the last report of IPCC, and the experts talk about nuclear energy. I think you saw it. They said that the construction cost of reactors remain high. They talk about the problem of waste management and the social and political acceptability of the development of this energy is not very high.
Yes, 3 good questions. So let's take it one by one. The price, it's, so far we say, okay, the price is cheap. For instance, wind is, let's say, 40 euros per megawatt hour. But that's not real. The price is what the demand makes it today. You can't store it. So the real price is the one who can deliver it. The reason why the solar and wind price is so low is because it has been prioritized on the network all over the time, meaning that they are the first to be able to sell the product. And we stop the nuclear, we stop the carbon systems as soon as that they are able to deliver the product. Should you make them compete, I would say, on the immediate market, you wouldn't be able to finance either solar or wind. So that's a big difference. So I would say that the nuclear price today is very cheap. If you look at Hinkley Point, what is the contractual price is 105 pounds, and the price across Europe nowadays, it's probably more than 200 and 250 euro per megawatt hour. So it's when you need it. And I think it's completely different as a perception, which makes nuclear probably very affordable. And it's the reality that most of the government across Europe are probably realizing nowadays. They realize that you have to have a base load, and either it's gas or it's nuclear. And one is obviously almost zero CO2 emission, which is why you are willing to do that. About the length of the construction, it's probably fairly normal that after 25 years without doing any nuclear power plant, we are bad at it. We don't know. And each one we are doing, like Flamanville in France, is a new prototype. If you start to do it like 20 or even 30 of it, you would get down the price of probably across 2 billion per unit versus 20 million for Flamanville, maybe even more. And it's what we had like 40 years ago. I don't see why we wouldn't be able to repeat that. Not even talking about SMR. SMR are factory-made nuclear power plants. It's much smaller, but the goal of it is to be able to make it as you do cars. For instance, it's to have an industrial process which is without any hazard and able to do it in mass units in general.
And to export.
Probably. There are several issues. And about the West, the first thing I'd like to say is there hasn't been anyone who died in France from the West ever. From the beginning of the electricity civil power plants to now, we haven't had anyone who died from it. So that's a statement which could be perceived by some by a little bit bizarre, but we've been very cautious about it. And now we want to deal this waste with putting it underground, 500 meters underground. I don't see any risk. How would there be any risk there? You could have an explosion that would be comparable to the one of Nagasaki. It wouldn't never come to the surface. And even if by any chance that would start to burn, which is not possible, that wouldn't come to the surface neither. So the deep web storage is a solution that has been fought by a lot of advocates against the nuclear energy because they know that as soon as we start to do that, the problem is over. Which is why, comment ça s'appelle?
Sometimes it's difficult to church.
The association, anyway, the German association against nuclear is so much unfavorable to this idea.
Okay, so your point of view, you can react, and you talk about the price of nuclear, industrial players of solar and wind.
No,
you
not
said
necessarily.
That it's profitable.
I don't want to talk about the.
It's not really the debate, but it's
no,
the debate in
what
France.
is very sweet to my ear is that 25 years ago, some people in the French sector just say that wind and solar is not possible. Now we just hear that. Not only wind and solar. So I say, okay, let's talk about in 20 years. Then we will see. I will say to my friends who are working in nuclear, stop faking news about wind and solar. Try to work better. Try to convince the citizens. with transparent information. Try to get, as we try to get insurance, private insurance, not state insurance. Try to do the best in your factory to have a good load factor. Of course, we know that there will never be solar during the night. Okay. Maybe we can also speak about, do we have to work on night? So if we don't work on night, maybe they will not need so much electricity. But it's another debate, it's more philosophical. But I'll say that a load factor, okay. Do you know why there is this huge energy crisis in Europe? You know, there is only in France that we are talking about the blah, 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 and the wind, and the solar, and the German, and then you take again, and German, and solar. No, it's what we call in Europe, it's the French disease, French nuclear disease. It's because we have 23 reactors that are down, and we have a shortage of electricity due to this problem, French problem. And we don't have in France to tackle every time the renewables, blah, 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 blah. No, try to do the best in nuclear, be more productive, more efficient, because the acceptance, there is two main factors. It's you are in country that the people want to have low prices, yes, but no production. So we just export production to China to get low prices. But so they want low price electricity price, okay? So first, if the nuclear want to be competitors, they have to reduce drastically their unit production cost, which is huge amount, which is very, very high, because if you get out in their figures all the effort from the states and from our taxes for the West, for the research, etc., the real cost that in competition to the independent power producers is 2, 3, 4 times above. So first try work on it. Then you have to understand that all the wind and solar, they are not coming like new technologies that will replace. It's also a social movement that has been, the roots of this movement was in the 70s. Okay, it was decentralization, democracy, and all these renewables came from a sort of social demand. It was a contestation against big infrastructures, big planning from the states, that you will have big plants, highways. You don't have to. It's planification, sort of. Okay, and there have been movements against this, and renewables are coming from this. So now every infrastructure, whatever, you have environmental regulation. There was no environmental regulation before the 60s and 70s. There is, you have to be transparent. There was no transparency in the 70s. Huh? You know that the Code des marchés publics is only in the 90s. There was no rule for financing political parties in France before 90s. So there is all these elements that are a sort of democracy items. And every infrastructures, wind, solar, nuclear, will have to tackle this, is that you have to deal with democracy. Okay, local democracy. And I think that wind and solar have a better chance than nuclear. But it's my opinion. And I say to my colleague, good luck. Try to get a new sites for nuclear in France. I know that this is in Finland. You can have this support because there are only 4 million people in a country that is huge like France. So they have a lot of space. So they can put, and they have, and also they have neighbors named Russia. So maybe having nuclear is quite a sort of insurance with France against, is a sort of insurance against these neighbors. But we say in France, if you want to have a new assets, a new infrastructure, there will be always now whatever problem of acceptance, local acceptance. Yes. That's democracy also.
For you, it's a sign of democracy.
Yes.
Yes.
Definitely.
You want, yes, Gilles Babinet, and after Gaël Dixon.
Yeah, very quickly, I just wanted to say a few words because I believe that it's needed. About the transparency, I don't see any industry which is more transparent than the nuclear. the regulator, you can go to the page of the ISN, you'll see any incident, zero class, for instance. You know, if there is a car incident in a power plant, you would know it. You would know everywhere where the waste, where it goes. There is no more transparent industry than the nuclear one. And you can argue on that. I'm taking it. You won't prove that.
I will not say the nuclear industry.
So
the French nuclear industry is very transparent.
it's exactly.
But the Chinese one or the Russian one.
Because the regulation, and we have people from the Agence Internationale de l'Énergie, we can testify on it. It's a global norm. The norm of regulation is becoming global. You know, so the Chinese are applying the same rule than we do in general. And regarding the efficiency of the system, even though we have half of the power plants that are shut down now, it's still 50% of load rate versus like 10% for the solar and 20% for the wind. You know, so that's not comparable, and you can pilot it, which you can't with the solar and the wind. So you can't say, I need energy, let's have wind, or let's have solar. So I wouldn't argue on that one, you know, because obviously it's the main difference, actually. It's the way that you can ask energy when you need it, which you can't with your system, because we don't have a way to massively load it, which is necessary. I love wind and solar. I think it's good, but it's limited in the sense that we won't be able to have it on the large scale if we don't load the energy in general.
So Guy Dixon, if you want to react, and after we will, it's important to talk about this subject, about nuclear, wind and solar, but also about acceptability and solution also to make project acceptable. But first of all, if you want to react to what just be said.
I would like to talk about the variability of wind energy. It is true, the wind is not blowing all of the time. So what are the real capacity factors of wind farms? Capacity factor means
Guy,
the percentage.
don't forget your microphone.
Thank you. Capacity factor means the percentage out of 100 where your wind farm is generating electricity. Now, 100% means 24/7, always at full maximum capacity. There is no power plant in the world that ever delivers 100%. There is always downtime for maintenance, repairs, and so on. If you build a new onshore wind farm in France today, or anywhere else in Europe, it will have a capacity factor of between 30% and 45%. If you build a solar PV farm in Spain, it will have a capacity factor of around 20%. If you build an offshore wind farm in France, it will have a capacity factor of at least 50%. When wind energy started, the capacity factors were around the 20% that you have just said, Gilles, but the technology has advanced. Wind turbines are now able to operate at lower wind speeds than was the case when wind energy started. Therefore, we have this increase in capacity factors. So wind energy is much less variable than it used to be. And you can manage the variability of the production by having more variable demand. This is why many of us now have smart meters in our homes. It's why many factories are concentrating their production at times when electricity prices are cheaper, because there is more wind and more solar in the system. I'd like to say a little bit more, Nathalie. You asked me to comment on acceptability again.
Yes.
So it is true that the public debate in France around onshore wind has become more complex in the last year or two than it used to be. It's also true that it is more complex in this country than in other countries in Europe. I think one reason for that is that France may have been a little slow in doing certain things that other countries are doing to ensure there are high levels of public acceptance. Last year, the wind energy industry agreed 10 measures with Barbara Pompili, les 10 mesures, and it was all about how to improve public acceptance of onshore wind farms. And it was all good stuff. It was all common sense. But a lot of those things have been happening for many years in other countries. One of the 10 measures was the wind farm developer must always consult the local mayor if he wants to build a wind farm. Well, I should jolly well hope so. That's normal behavior in most other countries of Europe.
Maybe what is difficult is that the project now, they are develop the project, but now we go back and we know now we may study, environmental study, and it's a little bit difficult, you understand? We think that we start to make the project and after we are thinking about the consequence, the impact.
Well, often people behave in that way,
yeah.
But there are basic rules of behavior for developers of wind farms across Europe that we, the industry body Wind Europe, apply and ask all of our members to behave in accordance with, and one of them is you consult the local municipal government when you want to build a wind farm. Another of the 10 measures says that communities should think, and wind farms should think about having lights on the turbines that don't shine all night. And there's this concept of light flicker, which may be common to many of you. Sometimes the lights flash, yes. Sometimes all night. Les signaux lumineux de nuit. Oui. Yeah? So, in other countries, in Germany, for example, it's now a requirement that those lights should only start flashing when an aeroplane comes by. And we have the technology now to ensure those lights only flash when an aeroplane is coming by. It's common sense. Yeah, but for France, it was something new. Fine, it's jolly good that you're doing it now, thanks to the 10 measures agreed with Barbara Pompili.
France look what Germany does, and they want to do the same.
It's good, it's yes. Good, fine.
So we will find some solution. Daniel Wetzel, you want to react?
I'm happy to. I feel like we've said a lot of things already, so I don't need to go over that. But I think that the conversation is striking that we're having it between nuclear and renewables. In a net zero scenario, this conversation needs to be about not building more fossil fuel plants or figuring out what the transition strategy for those are. In our outlook for our net zero, we see nuclear growing, we see renewables growing, obviously the fastest. Solar is the fastest growing source, then wind. But nuclear does have a very important role to play for many reasons we just talked about in terms of its dispatchability. One of the key areas nuclear needs to continue to advance on, and SMRs can play a role in this, is improving flexibility, because the concept of baseload power begins to sort of deteriorate when you have high levels of wind and solar, and assets that become the most valuable to the system are the ones that are able to fill the gaps between wind and solar. That's battery storage, that is demand side response, as we've talked about, that is fossil fuel plants with carbon capture sequestration, and that is more advanced nuclear techniques and hydrogen. So I think that is all to say many of these technologies all have a role to play. And going back to the theme of acceptance and the idea that different regions have different acceptability, that's what we see in our outlook as well. As in many regions where you see stiff public resistance, you can imagine that the advances in terms of moving more nuclear onto the system are going to be slower in those regions, and maybe those regions prioritize different renewables. France obviously has a high degree of acceptability. Something like China as well, nuclear is still very acceptable, and we see capacity additions growing there in our outlook. So I think the name of the game for reaching net zero and being on track for that is speed, and whatever solutions we have in our quiver today need to be advanced as we can. And I think one of the most important things, particularly from a US perspective, and even in other parts of Europe, is nuclear plants that are online today, should continue to be online, because decarbonization is so important to do in this next decade. We can't postpone those. Emissions done today make it much harder and much more work in the second half of the century to keep 1.5 alive. And additionally on that, lifetime extensions is something that needs to be looked at very seriously across all geographies. to be able to advance in those areas as well. So these are just some of the other considerations when we're thinking more globally about the objectives here. And I think all of these technologies do have a key role to play, and we need to think about those as a cohesive strategy as opposed to one versus another.
And you talk about the behavior of the citizen. When we talk about energy, we must think about cost, about the price of energy. That is really very important when we talk about acceptability. For a lot of people, energy is very expensive. What do you think about this main point, I think? And what we can do also for acceptability, it's also a question of price.
Absolutely. So I think, as we know right now, we're in an unprecedented price spike situation. And one of the key measures to reduce that sensitivity is to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and commodity price spikes that we're seeing right now. So nuclear, wind, and solar all have a role to play to reduce that. And one of the key features of how electricity markets function, and that's what Gilles, one of the Gilles, had brought up earlier, was that we're seeing very high prices right now, and that nuclear is very cost competitive according to that. The Hinkley plant would undercut the current prices. Those market prices are being set by the last dispatch generator, which would be natural gas in this situation. And so in many ways, trying to move away from those to wind and solar and nuclear reduces the volatility, and even long-term pricing for bilaterals, those prices are struck with a mind for what the volatility price could be. They're a hedging mechanism against that. So anytime you have a chance to reduce volatility, it also tends to reduce the overall lifetime bilateral contract of things that are signed. So that is an important aspect of this. But obviously, the first and foremost way to reduce bills for consumers is energy efficiency. And that, in our net zero plan, produces 60% of the emissions reductions in buildings from here to 2030. And retrofits, building standards, and appliance standards need to be aggressively applied today in order for us to hit those targets. So efficiency first is the mindset that people need to have when thinking about this decarbonization. That also helps with integration of renewables, also helps improve the digitalization of end use that can help with flexibility. All of these together as a package can really help reduce the costs that are borne by customers. And the last thing I think we touched on earlier that's really important is the removal of distorting fossil fuel subsidies. These have a strong impact on the way that consumers behave and bear and foist costs onto other parts of the system. So when we're thinking about managing affordability, eliminating those subsidies and figuring out how to make those very targeted affordability supports is a really important evolution that needs to happen alongside our clean energy transitions.
Thank you. I know that Pierre-Emmanuel Martin, you want to react, and what I propose is that you can react, and after, if there are some questions from the audience, it will be important also. So you can react to this question of price, but not only about, we talk about acceptability, you start to talk about some solution, local solution, but not only.
Yeah, the price is quite important because, of course, we know that high inflation rates are always social problems linked to. But I will say that we will have to think about in the next future that we have the base for the renewable transition, the energy transition and the decarbonization is that we have assets free of CO2, and at least that they are free from external shock, because it's renewable sources, wind, solar, hydro, but also if we accept that some sector like in France or Great Britain or Switzerland, the nuclear is very transparent. And I can agree with you, is that the operational cost is very manageable. So we can have a price that is still stable in the long term. Then we will have to work is that the people don't want kilowatt hour, they want energy services. So we will have to think about a system that is, there is incentives for the people to get lower bill, So with energy services, it's to be sobriety some way. And also to have this acceptance is that we will work on the energy efficiency, which is the main driver for the following years and decades. Okay, and then there is also something that is very important to accept. Wind is acceptable also because there is an industrial basis that is in Europe. And for the solar, and that's also the nuclear is also in Europe. We must have in Europe a solar initiative, massive, for industrialization. We must have workers. We must have all from polysilicon to modules, something that is huge. And then once we will have this, wind, solar, hydro, of course, which is historical for electricity, nuclear, if the nuclear industry tackles its own problems without thinking about my problem, then we will have the basis to work on the energy efficiency. And then we will have no problem anymore.
Gaël Dixon, and after Gilles Babinet.
I agree with Pierre-Emmanuel. In wind energy, there are 300,000 people working in Europe today. By 2030, that number should be 450,000 if Europe delivers on its goals for expanding wind energy. Just today, the Président de la République is in Le Havre, opening a new factory making blades
The
and
microphone,
nacelles
yes, to talk
for
about this, you're going to
offshore wind farms. Siemens Gamesa factory. This is the future. More and more people will be working in the wind and solar industries. And it's one way in which people can benefit from this. Of course, there are transitional issues. We've got to help workers from other industries to take jobs in wind and solar. A lot of people who used to work in offshore oil and gas are now transferring those skills across to offshore wind. It's a very natural transfer of skills and experience. In Romania, the wind industry has started a program now of training coal miners to work in wind farms. It takes us 3 months only to reskill a coal miner to be a wind farm operative because they have good technical and engineering skills. They're used to working in fairly extreme conditions. And this project has started. We will be replicating this shortly in Poland.
Gilles Babinet.
So there's probably more agreement on what we recently said. I think that, what Daniel raised and that we didn't so much discuss is the energy efficiency issue, which, as he said, is probably the main improvement where we can find the most important improvement in terms of saving energy in general. And I believe regarding the French debate, it's mostly about isolating houses and buildings in general. But we don't think so much about what I believe you are doing in your company, the smartization of the network in general. And it's surprising that a country which was at the basis of the 220 volts and the 50 hertz system, when in 1945 there was a government of national union, we decided to nationalize all the electricity makers, and by doing so we agreed on one single format for the whole country. And it's incredible. I'm not so much one who believe, and I agree with you on that point, that it should be always top-down. I believe that bottom-up is much more interesting for many aspects, but for some things, sometimes it's really efficient. And normalization is one of the things where we could really have huge benefits. And having a format of smart grid on the country basis, if not on the European basis, is one of the smartest things, so to say, that we could do to have more efficiency. And we are far from it, which is actually one of the reasons why I've been advocating recently at the EU that we start to work on it. It's surprising that we are not there. The most advanced in this system are probably the Chinese with Huawei, and the Europe, which has a very strong grid, isn't anywhere regarding this aspect. So I believe, and it's for those who are innovators in here, it's a very good place to start with.
Thank you. Est-ce que vous avez des questions? Do you have some questions? On va vous passer un micro. Voilà, il y a une main levée devant. Vous pouvez prendre le micro, c'est ça, super. Merci beaucoup. C'est au premier rang. Il y en a un sans fil ici. Voilà, super. Parfait. Merci beaucoup.
Hello, Emmanuel François is my name. I'm the chairman of the Smart Building Alliance in France. And this question is also for Daniel Wetzel. I agree that efficiency is certainly the first priority to answer to the current challenges and very short-term challenges, because we see that we are in a one-way at the European level, because we have the problem with the gas, but also with the nuclear plants, and I fear that summer and winter will be very hard for European people. And the question then is how you intend to deploy massively, rapidly, energy efficiency in Europe, and because today I don't see any message clear from Europe. And secondly, how do you intend to have a global approach and not a silo approach, as you still have today? That's we make energy efficiency on one side, and then we make whatever assisted living for solution for people and so on. We need today, we are in a digital world. So I think this is a unique opportunity today to combine in Europe digitalization and energy efficiency in every buildings and every cities.
Yes, it's for Daniel Wetzel, and also you can react if you want. Daniel Wetzel, you heard the question?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's a very great question. Back to our point on geographic differences, energy efficiency is one where the way you need to deploy those funds varies drastically from geography to geography, and the building types that you have, if we're going to focus on buildings efficiency in particular. So one, I would just say there is a cause for hope. We're tracking government spending and recovery packages for clean energy. Energy efficiency has received the bulk, a huge amount of funding in Europe. So globally, there's been 710 billion earmarked in recovery packages for clean energy, and 72 billion of that is specifically for energy efficiency, which is, of the small technologies we're looking at, the one area that got the most of anywhere. So that's a really good sign for where we're heading. Now, the challenge, though, is we see a lot of difficulty in deploying that funding and deploying it effectively. Local programs and utility programs have been the two modes that have proven to be the most successful, and countries that had those set up before the pandemic are already seeing progress there. But these need to be reinforced by cross-cutting building standards and cross-cutting appliance standards, which need to include, as you said, a digital component. These need to be implemented immediately, because every second we lose on new sales that do not abide by these codes, that sets us back 10 years as we wait for those systems to cycle out of the building stock once more. So this is really important. The last thing, and my understanding from my European colleagues is this is particularly bad in Europe, is we need to eliminate red tape and need to improve the customer-facing and consumer-facing interfaces for people to access these incentives. Oftentimes, there's rules and restrictions on historic buildings that limit people installing solar panels, installing heat pumps. I know my boss personally knows there's a subsidy in Belgium, had applied for it, was told by the contractor, oh no, you can't install a heat pump in your building, and there's no subsidy. So the information that gets to consumers needs to be clarified, and the rearrangement of those subsidies can really have a huge impact on deployment. So for instance, in the US, the contractor is the one who can reduce the price and receive that subsidy, or a portion of that subsidy, by installing a new heat pump or installing solar panels. So aligning those subsidies such that commercial interests are able and want to seize that money can really help advance these agendas. So there's all these pieces that need to be looked at cohesively, but we really need to try and do whatever we can to cut that red tape today and advance this going forward.
Thank you. You are ready to react. Free start.
I believe it's really true what said Daniel. There is a lot of red tape, and it's still very much of a problem. I had the issue in my own building, so I can tell you it's real. But I believe on the other hand, there are a few regulations that are coming. You've probably heard about the Green New Deal, and the subset of this Green New Deal are really interesting. The first thing is one of the things that we are now discussing is putting a real price on externalities. You know, so far it was a free meal. You could do whatever you wanted. You had no really incentive to isolate your building and so on, because you had an energy price which was very low because we didn't take into account the carbon aspect of it. And it's different now. We're going to put more carbon taxes on the boundaries of Europe, and it's good. But also we'll bring with a few things like the digital passport. I don't know how many people in here have heard about it. It's the idea of having into any product which is made out of into Europe, a passport which tells, a digital passport, which tells in detail what is in it in terms of externalities. And therefore it will be a very strong incentive for anyone to change things. You know, you would buy, let's say, cement or iron for your building, you would know how much carbon was in it. And therefore you would try to build things differently. And whatever it's about the usage or the building, that would be the same thing. So the only thing to me, it's when the regulation becomes enabled, and I hope it will be more of 2023 than 2027.
So it will be an answer to you, Emmanuel, based on experience. So we are strongly appeal for strong regulation, but there is the reality. What is the reality? We have, you know, that we have for all these poor they have some problem with energy bills. So we have a regulation in France that oblige all the suppliers to put in this house a sort of information, real-time information about the money you spend in electricity. Because when you know what is your bill, then you stop. Okay, it's the first information. Waiters. When I saw what I'm waiting, then I stopped to heat. But so there is this regulation. We have it. It concerns 10 million people in France, 10 million households. What did the suppliers do? They are lightening their obligation. So we don't have any more. You just have to somewhere have information somewhere, not real time. Okay? So that's always the problem. I will say that the last kilometer problem. You have the states who say, okay, we have regulation, then blah, 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 blah in the text, and at the end, there is always some lobby, some advocate to change the last kilometer rule that you don't have the digitalization we need. That's the real problem. So we will talk about if you want after that, but there is this problem that we can put 10 millions of this IoT in the households where to have the information, but one of these IoT tool is only 70 euros. So it's nuts, but it's too much for the suppliers. So they lower the obligation, and that's the way. We have the same for example, we have this new regulation to get PV on every rooftop more than 500 square meters. Okay. All the problem is that you can exit from this obligation if you can prove that you have blah 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 blah. So it's a low regulation also. That's a real problem. The last kilometer to reach the goal.
Yes, Guy, we've got only 5 minutes, so maybe there is a question, but a quick one, but I can answer.
One of the most effective ways of improving energy efficiency is to electrify our energy system. Only 25% of all of the energy we consume in Europe today is electricity. The rest is the petrol we put in our cars, the gas boilers at home, the fossil fuels that power our aviation, shipping, and much of our industry. Fossil fuels are less energy efficient than electricity. The European Union wants to raise the rate of electricity in our energy mix from 25% today to 75% in 2050, and that will help drive major improvements in energy efficiency.
Do you have another question? Yeah, this one. A quick question, and after you can answer, yeah, here, and after conclusion for everyone.
It's actually right in line with what you just said. Is don't you think we need a plan to reach that goal of 2050? How do we make that happen in France? When we have the syndrome of not in my backyard. French like windmills, but not in their garden. So how do we reach this objective without a centralized plan? I'm not a big fan of communism, but don't you think we need really a strategic, engineered plan so that we have more PV, we have more windmills, we have more small and modular reactors and so on? How do we make that happen?
Yes.
It's happening, actually. The plan is to get close to 32% by 2020 by having more power plants of all sorts. I mean, wind, solar, and nuclear. So it's taking that direction, and it's interesting because we are now realizing that we probably need to push that towards 40, even more %, which is kind of a challenge, and which is why we are decommissioning the last coal and gas factories that are in this country, and then we will just increase the risk. So I believe it's right in that direction, but on the other hand, we still need, what I said, to improve the quality of the grid and to smartize, so to say, the grid, which is probably, to me, what is the work to be done.
Gail Dyson.
We have a plan in terms of the big numbers, that's correct. We don't necessarily have the plan we need in terms of how we deliver those big numbers. We are getting there. The EU has a new energy strategy, Repower EU. There's more central planning there than there used to be. Next month, the European Commission will publish detailed recommendations to member states on how to simplify the permitting rules for new wind and new solar. It's that kind of guidance from governments that we need. I agree with you, Gilles, we need a plan for smart grid, and we need a plan for the grid, the connections, not least between countries, for example, Spain and France. And this needs governments to be more proactive than they used to be on energy policy. But at the same time, we'll only achieve those plans if we involve citizens bottom up and everything is done on a community engagement basis.
Daniel Wetzel, you can give a conclusion if you want in 1 minute.
Yeah, I would encourage you to look at the EIA's Net Zero by 2050 plan, where we lay out milestones every 5 years for every sector on what would need to happen. I agree with many of the points that I've just said. I would just harp on the importance of demand sectors. What we're seeing now is many of the supply sectors are ramping up investment roughly in line with what is needed, and fossil fuel supply investment is down to levels needed in our net zero scenario. But where we're not seeing that big jump is in changing the ways we use energy. If you're still using a petrol car, and we are ramping down how much we're investing in oil and gas, we have a big problem. This will definitely compound with the acceptability issues we've been talking about today. And these are the things that we need to sidestep. We need to have an orderly transition. And that's why I think a central plan that provides a framework is critical, because if these things go out of alignment, you have affordability issues, you have equity issues, and this is where you have these political setbacks that we cannot afford on our path to net zero. So I would encourage you to look at that report, a lot of useful milestones to push forward in plans in different countries and at regional levels as well.
Thank you very much. Nothing else to say? The last word? The end of the conclusion? No, it's okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you You can oh yeah. Thank you very much. Vous avez encore un grand programme, plein de conférences cet après-midi. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Merci.
Oh, well, of course. Oh, well, keep it up.
Merci. Je pense que voilà, on a essayé de balayer le sujet qui est vaste.